Welcome home. We are WNST, Taos, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I got my Coco's Pub shirt on today because it is the crab cake season. We're going to be down at Fadley's on Friday because the Orioles are home on Friday. So every other Friday lately, and 2 Fridays in a row this month, we're going to be at Fadley's on Fridays, 2 until 5. Luke will be there talking some baseball as the Arizona Diamondbacks come to town. And of course, we're going to be getting the crab cake tour back out on the road. Costas, Coco's, all of our places, Pappas's. We're going to be in those places beginning in June. Put the crab cake tour together for summer. Also got a little special oyster tour thing I'm doing in conjunction with the Maryland Lottery, as well as Liberty Pure Solutions and Jiffy Lube Multi-Care. Our friends at Cole Roofing power me up with the Royal Farms coffee in the Cole Roofing mug so that I can still be here, still be alive when the Orioles are this good, this dominant. And Luke Jones, I know you're going to say, yeah, they were really good last year. I understand that. I'm saying from they've gotten better. And anybody that thought last year was, well, they're okay, and maybe if they had some more pitching and, Santander and Mullins and Hayes and these older guys, well, we'll see what. I mean, I have never seen anything like this. I've been doing this 32 years. They just made a documentary recently about how long I've been doing this, and I've never seen anything like this team. And I keep saying this to my wife privately, sitting here watching these games, watching, Dean Kramer and watching Cole Irvin and just all of it, all of it. I mean, last week, the kid that's starting the Venezuelan kid, he's now in the bullpen. Suarez, we got that going on now. Things have fallen into place for this baseball team. It's May. Count me as a true believer. I'm a true believer.
Well, I'll say this. I believed in them last year. I'm going to continue to say that, but they are getting better and it's evolving. And that's why people were so excited last year. It's why people were so excited at the end of 2022. And we're seeing this play out. It's not as though they're without any issue whatsoever. We'll get to Craig Kimbrell, I'm sure. But they go to Cincinnati and they sweep the Reds. And not that the Reds are great, but they're another team in the, with a looking through the lens of young players and young talent and hoping to get better and kind of being in that tier where the Orioles were a couple years ago, right? And the Orioles are, we've seen it come to fruition. We've seen it in such an emphatic way work. And obviously now it's just a case of continuing to get better. And then once we get to October, which is so far away, and there's still so many obstacles between now and then that could potentially go the wrong way. But
I hope Grayson Rodriguez is healthy by then. That's all I hope.
Sure. Well, he's healthy, and you hope everyone else stays healthy in the process, as we saw. As we were waiting for Bradish and John Means to come back, they come back, and then Grayson Rodriguez goes down. So you're never out of the woods in that regard, but this is a heck of a baseball team, and they have the best record in the American League as they finish off a 3-game sweep with Cincinnati. Only the Phillies, who are just, a half game better than them after they finished off a good weekend of their own. But, I mean, they're playing at a very high level. And what specifically over the last week, when you consider what the tone of the conversation was, not necessarily between you and me, but how there was so much angst about losing 2 of 3 to the A's and the way that they lost and the bullpen being overworked and Craig Kimbrell being hurt/ineffective. Well,
and then Rodriguez getting hurt. Let's say that because we didn't know Bradish means you're coming back. Come on now, and certainly Cole Irvin, this whole wherever we've been the last couple weeks with him, it's astonishing. I said to my wife, I'm like, I know they're going to hit the ball, and I know they're going to have some slumps where they're going to miss the ball, right? Because they have some guys that miss the ball, but for the most part, they have more of guys that have good eyes, make good contact, are in control of the strike zone, all of that. But the pitching side of this, you've talked about it, I've talked about it. We're not worried about the starting pitcher, we're worried about the bullpen. We're not worried about the bullpen, we're worried about the closer. We're going to be worried. We're going to get to that in a minute. But to get the kind of starting pitching they've had this week, specifically Yankees in town, and then go out on the road, say what you want about the Reds over the weekend, but you got guys that are coming back from injuries, guys that are coming back from question marks all the way around, and to be putting up donuts as starting pitchers over the weekend. I stand very, very impressed by the Cincinnati sweep in a lot of ways on the road early in the year, all of that. They're not a great team or whatever, but I will look at that it showed me their strength in pitching, and it's answered some questions for me from Elias to say, all right, it's not like he knew all of this was going to work out, and he certainly didn't know if Bradish wasn't going to take a knife or not. But the stick to itness of him, the seeing it through the process, as Ozzie Newsome would say, follow the process of all of this, that if we have enough talent, enough arms, and that trade will come if we need it. If we really do need a pitcher, because 5 minutes ago we were ready to trade, I don't know, Mayo, just pick guys, just get rid of guys wholesale, trade them off, Stowers to get pitching. Still might need to do that, but not this week. Just not this week.
Yeah, yeah, and look, I mean, it's important never to judge a team when they're at their absolute best, which is what we saw with the rotation this past week. Nor should you do it when you're at your absolute worst. That's why, to your point, when there was so much panic after the Oakland series, not that I think anyone's concerns about Craig Kimbrell have lessened at all, but you look at it through a big picture lens. We know they've swung the bats at a very high level. I mean, they've led the league in home runs. They're right at the top in runs scored. Especially in the American League. But the pitching has been, more of a question, relatively speaking. But this last week, I mean, the starting pitching, especially amidst the concern with Grayson Rodriguez, who is starting to throw again. So it's not as though they've shut him down indefinitely, but obviously they had to slow it down and place him on the IL. But I mean, when you get what Cole Irvin's doing for you, obviously we've talked about Dean Kramer, who turned in another really good start. I mean, it's when you're getting that from the back end of your rotation, and then you start to get into, obviously you have Corbin Burns, Kyle Bradish is back, John Means does what he did on Saturday night, which was that to me that had to be the best. That was the best thing about the weekend. I mean, if you're really trying to look at this. For
because
John
we've
Means,
forgotten about him. Not
forgotten about him,
but
but
completely not even in number 2 pencil. Did either you and I were not talking about they'll get him back in July and he'll be John Mean. No, 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 no. It's still a question mark. I mean, even though we saw it on Saturday night, it was a question mark 3 weeks ago when he's getting his brains beaten in Norfolk, right? So that part of him coming back is an X factor that I have not talked about, or you and I have not talked about.
well,
Like,
I mean,
they'll have Means in October and he'll be fine. Like, we didn't talk out loud about that. When guys aren't healthy, I don't talk about them in the future, especially not pitchers.
well, we talked about him plenty. I mean, I did. Maybe you weren't listening. I talked to him about him a lot. The question was, okay, is it going to be peak John Means, who threw a no-hitter for this team literally 3 years ago on this past Sunday, or is it going to be a version of John Means that, okay, gives you some starts, but then the elbow's not feeling great, or he looks more like a number 5 starter? I mean, I think that question was fair. I think the
Question
question
was
is
always
more
a might be.
durability.
He might pitch, he might not pitch. He might pitch well, he might not pitch well. But it was certainly not. We really believe we're getting that guy back, top of the rotation guy, waiting on that, counting on that. At least
Yeah.
I'm not that way with Bradish or Means. I don't say I've written them off, but I was much more writing in arm troubles, coming back from arm troubles, not ready in April. Like, I'm thinking to myself, they're gonna have to make a trade. And we talked a
Well,
lot more about that, a lot more about like the possibility of they need to add to the rotation. Then Means and Bradish will be back, and all of a sudden Kramer will be the number 6. They need to go with 6-man rotation. I came up with that conclusion on Sunday. I'm like, let's go with 6 guys, Luke. We're gonna start a new rotation thing around here.
we'll see. We'll see. I'm not necessarily
I'm making that
in,
up, by the way. I don't want Burns pitching once a week. I'm with you.
yeah, and that's part of where I
We didn't have 4 starters the other day. Now we got 6.
sure. But again, it's a week by week thing. It really is. I mean, you're like we said, there was excitement at the start of the week that, okay, Kyle Bradish is going to pitch at some point this week. He's going to pitch that Thursday finale against the Yankees. John Means just shoved at Norfolk on Sunday, so he's going to pitch for the Orioles at some point because his rehab assignment had run out. So it can always turn quickly for the good or for the bad. So look, 2 weeks from now, you and I will be talking again about them needing to make a trade. I mean, that's
Dude,
just
when you're in first place and it
but,
takes a turn for the good, oh my.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
haven't had a whole lot of that around here.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's
Peter Angelos isn't here to screw it up. Neither's John.
fair enough. Fair enough. Absolutely.
That's the first time in 30 years I could say that out loud.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, to me, the trade deadline becomes that much more exciting because it's not just a matter of, okay, trading prospects, but can you take on some salary? Will there be a reliever that becomes available that, okay, you'll have to trade a prospect, but you're also going to take on some money. And David Rubenstein says, no problem. So that's certainly, those are the scenarios you're hoping that play out more favorably for them at this point. So, but I mean, it's still very early. There's still a long way to go to navigate a long, long season. We just passed the 20% mark, so to speak, the 1/5 mark of the season. So still a long way to go. Still have to keep pitching healthy. Still need to make sure you have enough arms. I'm Even though the rest of the bullpen has pitched well, other than Craig Kimbrell when he's getting rest. We saw it on Friday night. He looked really good because he'd had a few days off at that point in time. Saturday, not so good. So, but I'm still going to have some concern about the bullpen in the big picture October sense of thinking about it. But I mean, beyond that, what do you say about this team that you're not completely impressed about? Okay, they didn't swing the bats all that terribly well until Sunday, but you're going to go through those periods of time. You're going to go through periods of time where you don't swing the bats as well, and that's when you want your pitching to pick you up, and that's what happened on Friday and Saturday. And then you're going to have times where you don't pitch as well, and the bats explode like they did Sunday, even though they pitched well on Sunday. So, I mean, it's really something that I don't know how often a baseball team truly fires on all cylinders. And yeah, you could say right now Grayson Rodriguez is on the IL. So that's the one thing that's not going well.
So
Craig
is Austin
Kimbrell's,
Hayes.
yeah.
Austin Hayes,
Well,
they
but even Austin Hayes had become their fourth outfielder, before he even got hurt. So who knows what that's going to look like. So I mean, you're never having everything perfect. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. That's why, we've talked about this a lot with the Ravens in recent years at times where they have some injuries, and I just sit there and say, look, the extreme examples of like 2021 when the Ravens had a slew of injuries, yeah, that's a little bit different. But you're not going to sit there with a clean injury report every week. It's the same thing, with a baseball team over 162 games. You're going to have something. Something's going to spring a leak at some point in time. Then you fix that, and then something else starts to leak, right? I mean, that's just the nature of it. But by and large, I mean, things are just going really, really well for them right now. And I mean, you just look at them across the board, and pitching is still the relative, and I stress relative, weakness of this ball club, in the sense that I think if you just say Orioles versus Yankees, Yankees do have a better pitching staff, but I'll take the Orioles' position talent, the Orioles' defensive ability, the Orioles' speed and athleticism. I'll take those
I'll
factors. And I
take
don't
three
think
out of four games because we just did.
Sure, sure. So you look at it through that lens, but overall, this is 23 and 11 is 23 and 11. I mean, you're playing 676 baseball. There's not a whole lot to pick apart there, other than just October and thinking about what that means and getting to the next level and not just getting there, but making a run, which got such a long way to go on that front. And, even with the Craig Kimbrell conversation, where you look at this and say, okay, you still want to evaluate some of the arms you have internally. And look, we've seen Jacob Webb make some really big contributions over the last week. And, Albert Suarez, now it was low leverage on Sunday, but coming out of the bullpen, whether it's him pitching 2+ innings or whether it's him being shortened up to be an eighth inning guy for you at some point, you want to see what that looks like. And in the meantime, Mike Elias continues to survey the market and see what's out there and see what potential deals could be made, whether it's now or whether it's the third week of June or whether it's 12 hours before the trade deadline. I mean, there are different options and there are different layers to that. But in the meantime, you are getting some bullpen contributions that you like. And when you get starting pitching, like the Orioles have gotten over the last week, you don't have to work the bullpen quite as hard. And that's part of this as well. Remember last year, I so flippantly said because their bullpen was being worked hard that they either needed their starters to go deeper or they needed a few more blowouts, and you didn't have to throw Batista and Cano every night. So, Sunday was a good example of they didn't have to work their bullpen quite as hard, and you didn't even have to go to the Craig Kimbrell well or try to pitch Cano again or whatever. So the more you can mix those kinds of performances in, not that you take them for granted, but the more of those that you get, the better off you're going to be, not just that day, but for the next few days. They were in a position where with the off day, two in DC and then another off day, you're in a position where you probably wanted to get a couple guys work by the end of the weekend in Cincinnati, just because you're going to have kind of a lighter week just on schedule wise. So that all factors in. That's why anytime I see anyone, media or fans, and look, we all do this. It's baseball, second guessing and sitting there, on your couch, what guy are you bringing in and which spot? Who are they matching up against? Yeah, there's second guessing of Brandon Hyde, but there's also so much that goes into it that he's trying to not just win that night's game, but keep them in position to have a good chance to put their best foot forward the following day. And then in a big picture sense, trying to keep everyone healthy and trying, but also not wanting anyone to sit in the bullpen and collect splinters for 6, 7 days and not pitch. And that's why Mike Baumann, saw the ninth inning and, gave up a run and, I would say ruined the shutout, but it didn't really matter. I mean, they still won 11-1, but that's part of it. So, you're managing all of that, but it becomes so much easier to manage all that when you get quality starting pitching, when you get the kind of hitting that they got on Sunday where the bats finally broke out after, pretty quiet weekend up to that point, offensively. So, hey, 3-game sweep, there's not a whole lot to pick apart. I mean, there just isn't. I mean, even the Craig Kimbrell discussion that is ongoing and is relevant. I'm not trying to downplay it or be dismissive of it, but at the same time, I think you also had to recognize where Craig Kimbrell was, over the last 4 or 5 years. It's been up and down, and it's been a guy that you probably can't work like you did when he was 28 years old. So regardless of what his salary is, I mean, he's paid that now regardless. I think you need to look at it and say, if he has to save games 3 out of 4 days, like Felix
Not going to
Bautista was
happen.
apt to do, that's probably not going to be a good plan. And that's where I do look at it and say, Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias, you got to come up with a plan in that way. And that doesn't mean you get rid of Kimbrell or you demote him to the 5th reliever or anything like that. It just means, hey, we've got to view this through a lens of probably not a great idea that he's going to pitch back-to-back days or try to save 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 4. We've got to look at it a little more judiciously and try to keep him as fresh
He
as
doesn't
possible.
have to have 52 saves and be gaudy
No,
and look good on the bubblegum
no.
card. He needs to save the games that you bring him into. And
Yeah.
on the nights when he went last night, you don't bring him back tonight, and you just have closer B tonight. And when you're playing 700 ball and you play pretty good defense, getting 3 outs should be something any of these guys could do. Any of the guys that are available, even a left-hander in the right situation where you haven't brought him in and you get a longer start, bring Perez in the ninth. Let him, if you get two out of 3 left-handed batters, make them pinch hit and see where their bench is in the ninth inning. But those are the kind of matchups you're going to have because Luke, I was going to say this. By the way, Luke Jones is here, Baltimore Luke, and I want to give love to everybody that's been sponsoring us, taking care of our 25th anniversary and Curio Wellness and Far and Daughter and all the stuff that's been going on around here. If you haven't watched the doc, I hope you get a chance to go do that. We're going to be doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour on Friday. Come on out. But this is a weird week, right? 2 days off, sort of sleep in your own bed, go down to D.C. At least in the old days, that was sort of the way it worked. You'll be doing that. Burns goes, and then Bradish is going to go. Then you get another day off. Then they come home for a while, right? Then they got Arizona over the weekend. This is a time where, like, the exhale thing, I don't say bye week. They don't get such a thing in baseball, but I was thinking about this. They haven't had rain, right? They haven't banged a game, have they?
No, but they had a 5-hour rain delay.
No, but what I'm
First
saying, but they don't
homestand.
have to make games up. They don't have double headers
No,
slapped onto their
not
schedule.
yet.
Like, well, getting through April without having really all of that. So that pitching part of the tax is we got to make 2 or 3 games up. We have double headers, all that stuff down the line. They don't have any of that piling up on them now. And the thing that felt like pitching problems all of a sudden feels like they might be okay with the starters and look, you and I could have said that January, February, and March. If Bradish is okay, if Means comes back, if it was always an if with those guys. Now that they're back in here and pitching, I don't think we're gonna get 7 innings of shutout ball every 5th night from John Means, but it feels like his arm's not going to fall off. It feels like he's strengthening from where he was after the Tommy John to be. And they've been very judicious, very conservative, very cautious with all of these guys. And I have a lot of respect for that because it doesn't feel like the rented mule days of Matt Wieters catching 163 games a year
Mm.
and both ends of doubleheaders. We've come a little way from that in as far as load management for all these guys. But boy, the pitching and the week and the schedule and the Nationals and Arizona, this sets up to be a little bit of an exhale after whipping up on the Yankees and sweeping the Reds. They've had a hell of a week to be able to come home, have a little couple drinks on Cinco de Mayo, take a day off, get another day off, not be on airplanes and other weird places. This is a real nice settle in week for them. I think they're a first place team. They've accomplished everything that you want them to accomplish. They're as healthy as we could hope for them to be, Rodriguez aside. uh, you know, it, I don't sit back and count the cards at this point, but I would sit back and measure the progress and literally and look at it and say, wow, because this is where you wanted them to be in February and March. Might be ahead of where you would even have projected them on your best day, given the pitching.
Yeah. At the same time, I hear everything you're saying. The New York Yankees continue to win, even though the Orioles took 3 out of 4 from them. I mean, they didn't gain any ground on them over the weekend. So, I mean, you're really in a position where I, and I'm not suggesting that that's what you meant by the comment, but they can't take their foot off the gas because the Yankees are right there. And by the way, Boston continues to pitch really well. So they need to win and they need to play consistent baseball and they need to beat the teams they're supposed to beat. So I think your point's well taken just from a standpoint of get a couple days off. You know, you have two quote road games that aren't really road games, right? Because you're so close. So, I mean, the fact that they flew home after Sunday's game, which was a late start, I guess. What Cincinnati had a marathon and all that. That's why they started at 4 o'clock. It
Thank
was
you
a
for telling me that because I
Yeah, it
was
was
looking,
strange.
dude, I Googled in the morning because like my wife and I were like having coffee. And I just assumed the game was 1 o'clock, and she and I
Same.
have like a family meeting. And I looked down, and I saw it at 4 o'clock, and I'm like, all right, is it a national game? And we actually talked about Patriots Day in Boston. I'm like, because I said something to her, and this will be fun for you because you've traveled a little bit, but the Cincinnati trip, I remember going in there in the middle of like a German festival where the whole city was shut down, but it was football season. It was a Ravens game like in October where the entire city was like shut down, couldn't get into any of the streets, street fair everywhere. And I'm thinking, well, that was football season. And I'm thinking, I bet they had some kind of festival. So it was a running festival. Well, good for them because the 4 o'clock thing F with me all day. I'm like, come on, let's get the game going here. And then once it got started, I was like, all right, I can settle in on this 4 o'clock baseball. But the day was over when the game ended. It's like dark when the game ended.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I like 1 o'clock Sunday games, even if it is 120 degrees. But that a marathon. Good to know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because I did the same thing. I looked at my app. I guess it was early Sunday morning before I go to church, and at first I thought it was. Wait, did this update? Like, I was really confused, and then I looked to see if they moved it back because there was bad weather or something like that. But no, it was a race in Cincinnati on Sunday morning, so they
They
pushed it
did
back.
not have it on their website.
And
You're teaching me Monday morning about this, by the way.
well,
So
Kevin Brown mentioned it
they
on the
mentioned it. Yeah,
telecast. Yeah,
he did.
yeah, yeah. He did mention it. What I guess he even jokingly asked Ben McDonald if he had run in the race, and Ben kind of just gave awkward pause, like I'm not running in that. So, but we saw that and worked out because the Orioles travel wise, they're coming home. They didn't play on Monday anyway, so it was definitely strange, but hey, it was worth the wait. I mean, Dean Kramer pitched the way that he did, and the bats exploded. It was nice to see Anthony Santander breakout. We've been talking about how he has scuffled and save for a couple 3-4 game stretches all year. Hadn't really swung the bat all that well, so that was nice to see.
John Martin's got to go out and find $5,000 now before he comes on Wednesday, giving money away. I bet people just turned the game off and the bases got loaded. I'm a little weird with the lottery thing. I'm like, can you imagine being the lottery contestant of the day? Every at bat that comes up, you got a chance to win $500. Like it's like a spin, and then the bases get loaded. And you're like, nah, boom, gone. I'm like, all right, grand slams, they're fun,
Especially if you're
even when it's 7-1.
especially if you were out celebrating having a margarita for Cinco de Mayo and then that happens. I mean, that wouldn't be that'd be a nice little way to finish
Five
the
grand
holiday.
on 5-5. How about
Yeah,
that? I'm gonna have to bring it up with
exactly.
John Martin. Absolutely.
So it was good to see them swing the bats and break out the way they did. Not that there were any concerns Friday and Saturday, but it was more of a grind. I mean, what 2-1 and win the other game, you score 3 runs. So I mean, it was very much a quieter weekend offensively until Sunday, and then boy, it broke out and Ryan McKenna hits another home run and Jordan Westberg hits another home run and I mean, just up and down the lineup, looked good.
It's
So, I
almost
mean,
like 1970 all over again.
I mean, look at. I saw you made mention about McKenna on social media, but how about Jorge Mateo? I mean, how about Mateo swinging the bat the way he has? I mean, it's kind of becoming, even though Arias started and ended up getting a couple hits on Sunday, you're kind of seeing Mateo. It's looking more and more like he's kind of sort of becoming the everyday second baseman for the time being because he's swinging the bat, and Arias really hasn't swung the bat. So
Well,
maybe
and he
that
also knows
changes.
Jackson Holiday's coming. I mean, and
Well,
whenever that happens, unless there's an injury or a real setback,
sure,
he won't be playing second base in the playoffs. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
get. I tell you what, for Mateo and Urias, that's the hardest role in the world, right? That sort of, I mean, even for Austin Hayes to some degree, some of these guys, the bell tolls for thee. And that was for Patrick Queen last year or for any of these guys. And with Patrick Queen, at least he's playing.
Mhm.
With Mateo, at least he's playing right now. But there is a point where some of these guys know guys are coming and guys are coming to take your job and they're going to take your job. And now, if you get your opportunity, this is where you get to play and get a chance to continue to play elsewhere or in this system. But what valuable pieces they are, Swiss Army knife pieces that this team will absolutely need. Speed, defense, bench, all of that stuff. Because to your point, um, the notion that Kerstad's going to be a bench player or that Kowser was ever going to be a bench player, these sort of blue chip tools guys that you bring them up, you want to see them play 5 days a week. I mean, they have a limited amount of at bats. So that's why Mateo and Urias even playing a month and a half ago, we might have questioned that.
Well, and look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I love the idea of one or the other playing every day, which is their format right now. But that's where they are with Jackson Holiday, and that's just Holiday's working on stuff at AAA, and I've seen some video. It looks like he has the leg kick's not quite as exaggerated as it was. As I told you, it wasn't about him just going there and putting up numbers. They're going to make some adjustments. They identified some adjustments that he needs to make that isn't about AAA pitching. It's about hitting major league pitching. So, that's where that failure was constructive in a way of, okay, here's what you need to do. In the meantime, Jorge Mateo and Arias, look, you do the roster math. Are both those guys going to be on the roster the entire year? That's a big question mark right now. One or the other,
Well,
yes.
McKenna's part of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tougher to look at McKenna and say he's going to hold on to a roster spot once Austin Hayes is healthy. I mean, Austin Hayes had kind of become the new Ryan McKenna, so to speak. And we'll see how that works out. I mean, Colton Cowser, in fairness, he's cooled off, and that's not to say that he's, going to lose his starting job. I'm not suggesting that, but he's cooled off. Guys come back to earth. There's ebbs and flows to this. I mean, we know that. But in the case of Mateo and Arias, this is an opportunity for both of them right now where they know that you do the roster math come September. Is there a job for one of them? Absolutely. Is there a job for both of them? That's a big question mark, depending on how the roster is constructed. So you better take advantage. And we've seen Mateo do a better job of that than Arias to this point. So, he's even hit a couple home runs here recently. So, we'll see how it plays out. Jorge Mateo looked like, go back and look at his numbers last April. He looked like an MVP candidate and didn't hit it all the rest of the year. So, I mean, there's some of that that's always at work as well. But for all these guys other than Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman, right? I mean, really, they all know that there's someone at AAA that's gunning for them. No pun intended there. I mean, there's someone at AAA that's eyeing a roster spot or eyeing more at bats or saying, "Hey, I can come in and be better than that guy." And not saying that the roster is going to turn over that much, that dramatically, that quickly, but it's
If
already
I
turned
had a
over a
press
little bit.
credential, by the way, if I had a press credential and I were talking to Mike Elias, that'd be something I'd ask him about. I'd ask him about that good energy for jobs. You know what I mean? The backup quarterback for the Ravens knows he's not playing. Lamar's got the job, right? Like the backup catcher here knows he's only going to play twice a week in McCann or whatever. But to your point, the rest of these, Santander hitting a grand slam late at night, Mullins playing for a job, Hayes playing for a job, Mountcastle's been playing for a job from since the time when before they traded away Mancini, so like all of these guys, Mateo, hey, give me second base, third, I'll play wherever you sent me. Just give me some at bats, let me get into the game. And we weren't that far away from Westberg just being half a rookie last year. My wife was looking at Ellie De La Cruz. She's like, when did he come up? What's his story? Whatever. I'm like, he kind of came up like about this time last year. I said, I bet he hasn't even been up a year yet.
No.
And the same thing is true for Cowser. I mean, we go through all these guys. I feel like they've come with the laundry, and a lot of these guys are Grayson Rodriguez. We're talking about missing him. He wasn't even here this time last year. So it is amazing how quickly the furniture does change, but also the fact that there's real in some organizations it would be tension, right? And who knows with jobs and this, but only one guy can play the position most days. They have a really crowded, competitive situation that needs to be managed the right way because everybody that's on the bench wants at bats and feels like they've earned them, feel like they're big league players.
Yeah. Well, and some of what you just said, let's also remember guys struggle. And just because something looks a certain way, I mean, Grayson Rodriguez was in the Orioles rotation at last year at this time. He wasn't doing well. It wasn't going well for him. Colton Cowser got called up, right around the 4th of July last summer. He was awful. I mean, to the point where they had to send him back down. So that's
Jackson
another,
Holiday was awful. Was
there's
awful. Let's
another
call it what
example
it
for
is, right?
Jackson
Yeah.
Holiday.
Yeah.
Jordan Westberg was never awful last year, but go look at his numbers. They were pretty pedestrian. They were pretty, I don't know if underwhelming is the right term because
Why
I
are
thought
you here? You're
well, I don't
right.
know
I mean,
about
what
that.
about
It was
that?
just, it was more so if you watched him play, it was like, okay, is this really going to be a long-term guy or is this guy just fine for right now?
Dude,
And
that's why Adam
excellent.
Frazier and Mateo and that's why those guys were in the lineup last year, right? Literally.
Well, I mean that, we could have debated when Jordan Westberg could have been there. I mean, I still didn't quite fully understand the Adam Frazier signing when they signed him, but hey, it was fine. It wasn't a negative. But you don't always know how guys are going to respond. For every guy that comes up and is a star right away, you'll have some other guys that scuffle for. I mean, Adley Rutschman scuffled for 3 or 4 weeks, and Adley was beyond ready for the major leagues. I mean, you're talking about a kid who could have been in the major leagues a year earlier, but we know the Orioles weren't rushing because they were still really bad. And why do you want to start a service clock at that point? Gunnar Henderson struggled at this time last year. He was hitting under 200, but he was drawing walks and doing enough to say, okay, this is looking not great, but there's enough to like to continue to trot him out there every day. Whereas, with Jackson Holiday a couple weeks ago, there was so much swing and miss, so much striking out where it's just like, I think he needs to reset and make some adjustments here. So there are varying degrees of this. That's why I always say player development does not culminate with a call up to the major leagues. It continues there. So, and that's the challenge because the jump from AAA to the majors is so immense. And some people have even opined that because of all the pitching health concerns we're seeing at the major league level, you're maybe even seeing more AAA pitchers being promoted more quickly than they normally would be even. So, it's a theory. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's absolutely the truth, but it's challenging. It's challenging. So that's where when Jackson Holiday gets sent down, yeah, it's disappointing in the moment. And yeah, I thought they handled the whole thing. It was weird in how that was handled going back to the offseason, even with how they talked about it. But there's no reason to be discouraged in a big picture sense because you see what Cowser's doing. You see what Gunnar Henderson a year later looks like the MVP of the American League, other than maybe Juan Soto. He's in that tier though. He's right there in that discussion.
And
So
Westberg's a Major League Baseball
yeah,
player.
and Colton Cowser looks like he's going to be Rookie of the Year, so and Grayson Rodriguez until the shoulder issue, had been one of the better pitchers in the American League going back to the All-Star break last year. So it takes some time. It's really difficult to do this. And I don't say that to make excuses for guys, but when you're around it and you see the work that's put in, you see the preparation required, you see the work the entire organization has done to develop talent, it's a reminder of just because it's been really successful doesn't mean that it's easy all the time and everyone's going to get it right away. So I think there are enough success stories to say, all right, Jackson Holiday has to go down. It stinks for the moment. It's disappointing for the kid right now. I'm sure he's down in the dumps a little bit. This is the first time he's really failed at any level of baseball. But considering how these other guys have handled it and how they've pulled themselves up off the floor, up off the dirt, and turned themselves around, you have every bit of confidence that he's going to do it, whether it's going to be in June or whether it's going to be in July or August, or whether it's going to be next year, maybe. I mean, who knows? You never really know for certain. But with all those stories, this team continues to just roll. And when you're talking about a team that is winning 2/3 of its games, a little over 2/3 of its games as consistently as they are, and Oakland series was a hiccup, and then they go 6-1 and pitch the way they did over the last week. It's tough to be too concerned about anything, even if we'll continue to talk about some of the pitching in a big picture sense, and maybe a closer being acquired at some point between now and the trade deadline.
All right, Burns and Bradish, a couple days off around this. The Orioles will be home on Friday against the Arizona Diamondbacks. We go see the Orioles play Tuesday or Wednesday night. I get to just go down to D.C. and pay a lot at the park and Gucci little neighborhood down there and pay your tolls, have some fun, go down there and hate on the Washington Nationals in the great Peter Angelo style of give us back our Masson. He is Luke. He is Baltimore Luke. I am Nestor. The 25th anniversary documentary, No One Listens, Everyone Hears, is available. Luke and I will be at Fadley's at 2 p.m. on Friday, getting ready for the Arizona Diamondbacks. All of that brought to you by the Maryland Lottery. I will have Pac-Man scratch-offs to give away. Also, our friends Jiffy Lube Multi-Care and Liberty Pure Solutions, bringing it all home for us. It's May. Birds are in first place. Ravens are out running around doing little mini camp stuff. Luke will be on all of that stuff as well. And we have an election this week here in Baltimore, Maryland. Make sure you're voting and voting responsibly. We'll be talking to some more political candidates before the week is over. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore positive.